the things that I'm going to say, having been a lecturer all my life, but today I thought, I hope we can mostly view this as a happy occasion, as Diony would wish. Not sure whether I can get through this without someone less emotional having to take over, so that's why I've written it out. Supposedly I should only take about 14 minutes. But I first came to French Pass on a route with Diony in July of 1967, 57 years ago. You know, the first year that we'd saved enough for travel since my graduation the previous year. We were married in '64. So I want to relate to you our fortuitous meeting in Arizona and a couple of Diony's most proudest achievements. So, having come here 57 years ago, Diony had been working temporarily as an airline travel agent in St. Louis, which many people probably don't know. I met most of the extended Weber Sutherland family all at once together at the gathering for Daddy George's passing after our arrival in Auckland, when Nancy picked us up in her car and drove south. Diony and I made the last part of that first drive along the pass road with me sitting on the bonnet of Nancy's old Hillman, operating a movie camera. Diony navigating through the scenery along the recently completed road. The power lines hadn't yet been extended, and I remember warming ourselves with many of the family around the old stove in the big house. Such great memories don't seem that long ago. I'm glad Judith is here, because without her fateful decision, neither myself nor my offspring would be here today in this lovely location. As related to me early on, Diony and Judith had planned to travel together to the U.S. and then go on to England following Diony's graduation. These plans changed, I'm told, partly due to a fellow named Jeff. As a result, Diony eventually convinced Nancy to replace Judith as her traveling companion while crisscrossing the USA Greyhound bus package tour, $99 for 99 days. But a University of Canterbury professor told Nancy that if they were going to visit the Grand Canyon, they should contact his former American master student who worked at the Museum of Northern Arizona for advice and suggestions. When they contacted Bill, he had been hospitalized for a hernia operation, but he turned over his house and Volkswagen to them, resulting in a longer than planned opportunity to visit many of the natural wonders in the Southwest. During their visit, Museum Director Dr. Danson asked Diony if she would be interested in replacing his retired publications editor. The museum had a backlog of work on salvage archaeology reports for the construction of the last dam on the Colorado River, Lake Powell, and the potential Indian land disturbance. Diony turned down Danson's kind offer, explaining she was booked on a cargo ship sailing from New York City and had no work visa. By the way, Dr. Danson is also the father of actor Ted Danson of Cheers. Ted Danson was a small pipsqueak at that. So Diony and Nancy eventually completed their 109-day bus tour, extended for 10 additional days by a generous Greyhound agent who couldn't refuse Nancy's pleas. Who could? Set out for New York City and Diony's departure. When Diony learned the sailing had been delayed several weeks and unable to afford the cost of staying in New York City, Diony contacted Dr. Danson about his offer. She requested a salary, temporary living quarters, and a work visa. As a result, she ended up with the editing position as well as a coveted green card. So, if it were not for Judith and Diony's change of plans and the unexpected advice of an unidentified Cornell graduate student, to be explained shortly, we Youngs would not be standing here. Had Judith rather than Nancy accompanied Diony on their planned trip, there would have been no extended stay in Flagstaff, no museum employment. Diony and Judith undoubtedly would have found an inventive Kiwi solution to overcome the delay of the cargo ship in New York, and eventually they would have sailed off into the sunset. So the Nancy and Diony saga continued with our fortuitous meeting in Flagstaff. They set off back across the U.S. to farewell Nancy for a return to New Zealand. Their brief stop in Flagstaff to thank Bill and Dr. Danson coincided with one of my resupply trips from the Grand Canyon mapping project on the Indian reservation. It also fortuitously corresponded with a brief stopover of my parents and brother on an epic cross-country trip to California in their small Volkswagen. This travel-weary group of 7 strangers coincidentally ended up sharing a brief luncheon at the home of the geologist, Bill, and Diony later related to me that her first impression of me was that I must be an alcoholic because of the 2 beers I consumed during that brief luncheon. We all parted after a couple of hours with little expectation of events to follow. I had begun graduate school in St. Louis and was in Flagstaff solely due to a last-minute change of plans following completion of my undergraduate degree. I had accepted a research project in northern Canada at McGill University. However, a chance encounter and unsolicited advice from a graduate student I had never met led me to rethink my summer being tortured by Canada's infamous black flies. A new Cornell professor had tried to get a Cornell grad student to accept the Grand Canyon mapping project at the Flagstaff Museum, but they'd all turned him down. In desperation, he asked me if I were interested. I protested I was leaving Cornell with no plans aside from Canada and no car. After further consideration, my father offered me his used Volkswagen for $800, and I decided the Grand Canyon would be more pleasant than the fly-infested northern Canada. So, funding by the museum was $1,000 for the summer, so my $800 purchase left me with limited finances. Other random events brought Diony and I to the same location. Following Nancy's... It's working?
Yeah, it seems to be working.
The white changed color, I just want to make sure.
Might be just voice activated.
Following Nancy's departure from California for New Zealand, Diony returned to her new museum position. I don't remember exactly how we reconnected, presumably during one of my resupply trips from about 120 miles away from the museum. Meanwhile, Diony had become adept at befriending backpacking New Zealand and Australian students as they passed the museum while hitchhiking 80 miles to Grand Canyon. The first formal activity I clearly recall was Diony and I going to a drive-in movie. Diony later confessed she was pleased that I had behaved as a gentleman while cooped up for 2 hours in a cramped Volkswagen. The surrounding volcanoes and meteor crater, famous meteor crater, nearby resulted in the museum becoming the headquarters for the hastily organized U.S. Geological Survey team assembled to train the Apollo astronauts and pick the lunar landing sites. Thus, the museum was a hub of activity which attracted numerous geologists and students. Right, skipping some important details, such as our long-term friendship with the Hunt family and their ranch in Arizona. By the following summer of '64, Diony and I decided to get married during Christmas break by converging from St. Louis and Flagstaff on my parents' farm in Rhode Island. There was no formal marriage proposal on my part. I simply recall a discussion. Should we or shouldn't we?
Glad you did, Dad. Glad you did.
I don't actually remember that. I've often wondered how Diony must have debated abandoning her travel plans as well as her close family ties and her life back home in this amazing country. It was certainly not to marry a rich American. During one of my resupply trips to Flagstaff that summer, Donnie announced she had something to show me. She held out her hand with a small package, her newly purchased wedding ring. We had not discussed this consequential purchase, but I readily accepted her independence as the sign of a strong and motivated individual. Where does that trait come from? In my defense, at least Donnie had income, whereas I was essentially broke. She might have feared I would go into debt buying a diamond ring, and she did not like diamonds, fortunately. The announcement I was marrying a New Zealander generated mixed responses from my parents' friends. The most unusual came from a close Spencer friend with the honorary title of Aunt Grace, who inquired, "Does she carry a spear?" Followed by, "Does she speak English?" I think she confused New Zealand with New Guinea. Our brief wedding ceremony had only a dozen so witnesses, including Jan, Wallace, and Zoe, with me simultaneously coordinating the taping of the ceremony for Nancy. So I had to interrupt my I-dos. The celebratory dinner included many additional participants and occurred at a restaurant with a large dining room and an unexpected New Zealand guest. John Wipiana was a New Zealand Rotary sponsored on a New Zealand Rotary sponsored lecture tour and was enjoying the hospitality of local Rotary members who were friends of the Youngs. His contribution following the dinner consisted of the loudest, most enthusiastic Maori haka that you have ever heard, which echoed throughout the facility and shook the wooden floor dining room as though there had been an earthquake. I'm sure no American had a clue as to what a haka was back in the 1960s. Needless to say, Donnie's friendly and sparkling personality endeared her to the numerous individuals encountered on our many visits to Rhode Island. Donnie had an engaging smile for everyone, but possessed the strength to confront those who stood in the way of her many causes. Donnie's legacy, getting to the end here. The staff at several of large hospitals in Rochester didn't quite know what had hit them when Donnie single-handedly went about defeating the pending New York state legislation intended to ban husbands from delivery rooms. We were told Christopher's birth would be the last such husband-attended event allowed in the state. Donnie, barely 30 and lacking U.S. citizenship, effectively put an end to those proposed plans, largely, promoted by obstetricians. But while waiting seated in one hospital administrator's office during that crusade, Diony noticed the letter she had sent him lying open on his desk. Although she had to read it upside down and backwards, she saw in large letters written across her letter, "Who is this woman?" Diony did have some tense discussions with father-in-law, George, concerning episiotomy, circumcision, rooming in, and breastfeeding. However, he was won over by her 500-page award-winning book, Changing Childbirth. Diony went on to serve on many local, state, and federal healthcare-related committees, including a Washington, D.C. Senate committee chaired by Hawaii's Senator Daniel Inouye, all before she begrudgingly applied for U.S. citizenship. So long ago. One of Diony's favorite triumphs was her key role in a lawsuit under a federally mandated anti-discrimination law called Title IX that forced the New York College at Geneseo to provide equal opportunities lacking at the time for women students and faculty. I was a bit naive to imagine that the local administration, shock and surprise, had no effect on my role as geology chairman. But political issues never concerned Diony where fairness and justice were involved. This may be a genetically controlled family trait. Despite Diony's final professional accomplishment, of which she was most proud, was the 2 decades she enjoyed as independent editor of the journal Birth and the many challenging opportunities that experienced provided. She worked on this 24/7, and I'm sure she would have accepted the job even without any compensation. The Young Sutherland Weber interactions over these many years have had a positive and major impact on the lives of our U.S. family. Never a week seemed to pass without lengthy phone calls, discussions about New Zealand, or the arrival of newsy letters. One more paragraph. The organization of the trip for George and Barbara to New Zealand in '68, with expert travel guidance from Wallace and Juliet, was certainly the highlight of their international travels. Nancy's several trips to Rhode Island over the following years only served to cement the close bonds between our families, as well as with the many family members who have passed through Geneseo. Like the Webers, both my parents' ancestors have a strong connection to the sea and to the early whaling industry in New England, including tracing our ancestry to 2 passengers on the Mayflower ship that brought the Pilgrims from Plymouth, England to Massachusetts in 1620. The young farm in Rhode Island was a land grant in 1690 from King James to the Reynolds family, whose descendants still owned the property when purchased by George and Barbara some 250 years later. But had no electricity, no running water. It was great. Thus it is fitting that Diony's remains should finally come to rest in this unique seaside location where many of our most pleasant family experiences have occurred. She would have relished this occasion and the opportunity to join us on one last fishing trip through the pass. The end.
Nice.
So here we go. There once was a lady named Diony, whose brooches were all very shiny. She dressed with great style and a show-stopping smile. She grew cactuses galore that were spiny. There once was an Easter egg hunt. The hiding was only a front. The cause was another of a loving grandmother to give winter doldrums a punt. Diony's middle name is a bird. The huia, perhaps you have heard. This bird is extinct. To Maori chiefs it was linked. Museums are where it's now interred. And finally, a Kiwi lass by the name Sutherland sailed on a ship away from her motherland. She roamed the U.S. from state to state, finally finding her geological mate. We're glad she didn't end up in some other land. So it's strange to imagine that Diony spent 70% of her life living in the US and only 30% of it living in New Zealand. But she really lived internationally, a citizen of both countries, and she raised a family that felt at home in both countries. Part of my identity has always been having a weird mom from New Zealand, which really meant just that Diony helped Erna and myself both feel connected to this country and to all of you. Even though we were growing up 8,600 and some odd miles away from where she grew up. I am very happy to be back here after 10 years away, and especially happy to be here with all you wonderful people. I'll now present you with some slightly disjointed thoughts about my mom, Diony Young. I think everyone who knew Diony probably knew her as a generous person. She loved to give gifts, she loved to give assistance, she loved to help people out. I think back to about 1982. We're all on our way to New Zealand, and Diony's luggage is stuffed to bursting with cheap digital watches and bubblegum to bring to her nieces and nephews. It's 1997, and Diony heard that a classmate of mine in graduate school, whom she had never met, It was in hospital due to a terrible accident, and so she immediately sent a Bowron's lambskin to the hospital to make this student more comfortable in her hospital bed. 1977, 1978, 1979, 1980, etc., etc., etc. Diony is loaning books about childbirth and midwifery to some pregnant stranger who called her up out of the blue. It's the early 2000s, up through just a couple of years ago. Diony hosts an annual Easter egg hunt for her grandchildren. Over the years, by my calculations, over 1,700 hidden Easter eggs and treats were found by her 4 grandchildren, and approximately 22.5 pounds of candy was eventually found by the squirrels of Geneseo. When you look at photos that include Diony, she stands out. She's the one wearing something snazzy. She's the one whose earrings or necklaces look like some curious and colorful sculpture, whose blouse or jacket looks like modern art. I think about Diony just about every day. I think about her whenever I step down that weird step by our front door where she fractured her ankle a few years ago, and then she drove home to Geneseo thinking it was just a bit of a, drove herself home to Geneseo thinking it was a bit of a sprain. I think about her whenever any of her grandchildren do something momentous. She loved hearing about those grandkids. She certainly went to a lot of band concerts and soccer games and dance recitals, etc., etc. I think about her each year when I get my school photograph taken on picture day. She really enjoyed the fact that at age 40, when I became a teacher, we got to return to a time when I would present her with a new official school photo of myself dressed very nicely at the start of each school year. I think about how she would have liked hearing about something funny that happened in the classroom. I miss telling her those stories of the things that go on in my classroom. I think about her whenever I get a nice note from a student. She missed a good one from December of last year from a kid named Isaiah that said, "Mr. Young, thank you for being such a nice chemistry teacher. Keep on teaching. Party hard." I think he just didn't know how to end it. I can hear Diony's snort of laughter at that one. In keeping with Isaiah's message to me, I'll wrap up with this wish for Diony and for all of us. Thank you for being such a nice mom. Keep on fighting for the underdog and party hard.
Oh, I gotta do this. Hello? All right. Well, so obviously everybody here knew my mom, knew Diony, but I'm the only one who got to be her daughter, so I thought I'd share some thoughts specific to that. So the first one is, sometime in mid-adulthood, I guess when you're a little kid, your circumstances just seem normal. You don't realize how unique or special they might be. And like Chris said, we had the weird New Zealand mom, or that's what our friends thought of her, because Diony was the only New Zealander she knew and the only accent they'd heard like that. But so I just thought my life wasn't so different, and you know, my mom was just a mom. But somewhere in mid-adulthood, I had a thought looking back, and I realized that my mother never got in a fight with me. She was never angry with me. We never argued. You know, to have an entire childhood and life where I had a mother where, you know, I certainly wasn't perfect, and I tested some rules with my parents, but somehow the way she handled being a mother, I don't recall her ever being angry at me. And I just thought, wow, that's, I don't know if everybody gets that, you know. She was just so calm and peaceful and discussed things, and, you know, except when she was championing for her causes. The other thing, having her as a mother, I realized that I was very lucky to have, was that I always felt completely loved and supported. And never had any fear of failure, could do whatever I wanted. There just was never any question. Somehow I had both my parents made me just feel it didn't matter if I failed at anything, so I wasn't afraid to try things. I just felt completely, utterly loved and taken care of, and all the way through recent difficult divorce, and she was very supportive of all that, those challenges as well. Let's see. And then there were two specific memories I have I wanted to share. One of them, I had to have been 3 or 4 years old because it was at our first house at Stuyvesant Manor. And Diony was out in the sun on a lounge chair with her gorgeous tan legs, stretched out. And her eyes were closed. She was just enjoying the sun. And I was the little kid standing next to her and saw that a large bee had landed on her big toe. And I said, Mom, it's a bee. And she kind of cracked her eyes and said, oh, yeah, it's all right. And, we'll just let him be. And as long as he's not going to bother me, as long as I don't bother him. So we watched this bee crawl around her toes longer than I was, well, it was a learning moment is the point that, Diony had this calm, collective attitude that she, I feel like, imparted on us for life, that she wasn't scared of things that other people might be scared of or rattled by things, and she thoughtfully observed things, and anyway, I always remember that moment, and I never was scared of bees after that. The other memory was Diony loved to dance, and she'd put on the ABBA record that had Dancing Queen, and she was dancing in the living room with Chris and I don't know how old I was, but I was right at the verge of, she could still lift me up and put me on her hip, but and while the three of us were dancing there in the living room, I know Chris was turned down. Diony actually had to tell him that he was too big, and she couldn't do with him what she was doing with me. But I still remember how it felt to be on her hip, and she was spinning around to that song Dancing Queen, and I just feel like that's how she approached life. She enjoyed it and embraced it, and really taught me how to dance. And so lots of love to her, and I'm glad you're all here. She'd be so happy everybody's together at the Pass today. And who is speaking next?
If Theo is not, then we're singing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not singing with this microphone.
So we've got some songs, and Wyatt is going to intersperse throughout the speeches, not after everybody. So
Okay, great. It's really my pleasure to present another side of Diony. It's been alluded to in Richard's remarks. Diony had a whole professional life, and indeed, in addition to being a loving mother, grandmother, good friend, and just all around great person. So I was living in Seattle when my phone rang. Hello, I answered, and there's a little silence, and suddenly a voice says, "Good God, are you another New Zealander?" The answer was yes. We discovered we were both from Christchurch. We both were interested in women's health issues, and we bonded and became friends for the rest of our lives. That was 1979 when that happened. We grew in our interests together over the issues of women's health. I know it sounds sort of esoteric in a way, but women's health in the USA in the 70s and 80s was a very fraught condition. Mechanization, hospitalization, drug usage in the sense of medical drugs were being forced down women's throats in amazing numbers, ways, all of course for money, ultimately, at the end of the day. So diony, his particular focus was on all aspects of childbirth and providing guidance to changing outmoded birth practices to more women-directed practices and mother-directed practices. To these ends, she worked in several roles in the USA as a lecturer, educator on childbirth care, as a writer and editor. Most notably, she was very interested and focused on improving the health care for newborns, for women, and for children. Most notably, as has been mentioned, she was the editor of a journal called Birth, Issues in Perinatal Care, known colloquially by most people as Birth Journal. In terms of diony's significant state and national impact, and just stop and think about that for a moment, here is this young woman, a mother, not an academic, who had influence in a country of 300 million people.
Yeah.
She was from, with all due respect to upstate New York, not a dominant place in American life, not San Francisco, not New York City, not Boston, but she sat there at her typewriter and her phone, and she got the word out. She served for more than 20 years on 12 varied federal and state committees, panels and commissions. Now you have to get appointed to those. Somebody has to know you, somebody has to back you, somebody has to say, this person is worth listening to. Diony was that person who had that influence. It's really quite remarkable. Competition is enormous to serve on those committees. They are often paid, which is one thing, but they create prestige. So you have huge competition amongst academics to be on those committees, and their reputations can be made or broken by serving. Diony's reputation only grew from her service, and that was because she skillfully navigated highly controversial topics on aspects of medical practice. Can you imagine this young woman from upstate New York and New Zealand telling Harvard-trained obstetricians and gynecologists, no, you're not doing it the right way. This is the way it needs to be done, and this is what women want. It took an awful lot of guts. But she did it with charm, with Kiwi humor, and with a way that I can relate to in what you're saying about her being a mother. She didn't make people feel foolish. She didn't put them down. She just quietly went about proving that she was right. Some of the topics that she is best known for are areas of indications for caesarean section, uses of diagnostic ultrasound, advisories for labour pain management, regulations for safe home deliveries, organisation of rural birthing services, and regulations for public breastfeeding, a very controversial issue in the US at the time. Diony's colleagues on those committees were generally very senior physicians or academicians, as I've pointed out. And again, I can't emphasize enough how remarkable it was that people actually listened and responded. She also served on the board or committee member for 13 different childbirth-related organizations, including the American College of Nurse Midwives and the International Childbirth Education Association, and on 7 different committees for her local health systems agency in the Finger Lakes district of New York State. Pretty thankless work on those local health agencies, but she did it with grace, charm, wit, and wisdom, and determination. She also spoke, or was a keynote or guest speaker at close to 100 conferences on maternal and child health or childbirth education in the United States, Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Poland, and Switzerland. Everybody got a chance to hear her. It's terrific. Most significantly, she was a writer and an editor. She authored or edited 9 books in major publications, numerous position papers and resolutions, and 55 journal articles and editorials have been published under her name. She began her editing career in 1962 in New Zealand and retired from professional editing in 2012 after completing, as Richard mentioned, 22 years as editor of Birth Journal. I was also a journal editor and turned my journal over for one of its quarterly issues to Diony, who edited it all on issues surrounding childbirth and women. And it was so successful, it was published in hardbound as a book that could stand alone. When she began in 1990, Diony was Birth Journal's second editor. Her editing rigor helped grow the journal's circulation, improved the quality and significance of submissions for publication, and raised its impact ranking. Impact rankings are very significant. They're a recent, relatively recent in the last few years, development in the US. And Diony, this will sound ridiculous in a way, but because the rankings are so miserly in their numbers, but Diony took it from below 1 to up to 1.9 under her editorship. That is a huge increase. I experienced Diony's skills as an editor firsthand when she asked me to review a book called Pushed, The Painful Truth About Childbirth in America. And, excuse me just a minute there. Sticky fingers. So, I had used the word including. I've never thought about the word including quite as much as I did when back came the red pen from Diony saying, should say that includes, much stronger. There was no question of an argument. She was right. I stopped and thought about it, and I've remembered it ever since. Don't use the word including. It means you're losing the argument. Diony's connections were worldwide in the world of women's health. She will be missed by so many people. I miss her from the point of view, from many points of view, of just being an affectionate friend. But also, she was one of the few people, when Americans just get too much for you, I could call Diony. And we could swap notes about the silly things they didn't understand, and why do you have to do this, and why do you have to do that. It's great. But there's this lovely tribute that I received from the Our Bodies, Ourselves collective, and I think most of you are probably familiar with that publication. It's been probably the most successful publication on women's health in the world. And this came from Jane Pincus on behalf of the collective, and they would like it to be shared with you. I had been thinking of Diony lately and thinking to call her. Now I hear about and grieve her passing. Let's celebrate all that she did so well and for so long to help us understand the forms taken by maternity care systems in all sorts of circumstances throughout the world. The studies she presented, the facts she garnered and detailed out for us, her analyses, her wealth of knowledge, and her empathy have taught me so much. I owe her thanks for asking me to be one of the reviewers of childbirth information books for Birth Journal. What a joy and a challenge to be in communication with her over the years during the writing processes. She always sharpened and clarified my thoughts and words. Plus, it was always great fun to talk with her. On another personal note, She and Richard visited me over a decade ago now, here in our little town in Vermont on a sunny autumn weekend. I've just this moment found on my bookshelf her rich description of her life, New Zealand to America, 1963 to 1966. She remains so alive to me. How I would love to read that at some point if it's still around on someone else's bookshelf. Dear Richard, I haven't read Diony's description of her radical change from a New Zealand life to a United States future, but I'm sure you feature prominently in it. Diony loved you dearly. You supported and encouraged her in her important work, as only a truly loving spouse can. Our last time with all of us together at beautiful Bushak Gardens in Canada, where you lovingly carried her handbag because she no longer could, and you helped her through all the pathways, made a wonderful afternoon for all of us. Thank you. And Erina and Christopher, she adored you. She loved that you made her a granny. I'm sorry. And you have shown in your comments how you understood her wry sense of humour, and her warmth, and her determination, her bloody Kiwi determination. My thanks to you all as Diony's family for allowing me to share in this whānau of wonderful connection. Ka arohi poki.
Kia ora.
Sorry, my getting out of these sofas is not easy.
Do you want me to just bring this in?
Okay.
Yep. Just hold it up.
I'm not going to begin by talking about Diony, so just excuse that. Not that I didn't love her dearly, as much as I knew her. I want to talk about Matariki. Matariki holiday was last weekend, more or less. It's a new holiday for New Zealand, and it celebrates the time of year when about 8 or 9 stars are visible. And those stars are particularly important. They are at the time of harvest, and they are at a time when people get together and they reflect and they look back and look forward, and they particularly, each of the stars represents a certain aspect that is of importance in life. And so it means people that harvest, hunting, fishing, people getting together to share that bounty. And one of the stars is called Puhutakawa, and that is the star, is when you look back at the people who have died in the year before that. And so that's what we're doing here. The timing is quite fortuitous that it is here. And I mean, this is an amazing gathering of people who have come together, and we're hearing these stories about Diony, and I'm hearing things that I'd completely forgotten or didn't know. I was about 9 when she left home. So I just thought it was worthwhile thinking about that, and if the American family didn't know that Matariki existed, it's now, I think, a public holiday that has been grasped by the whole of New Zealand's population, and it's not one of the colonial ones. It's not King Charles's birthday. So I think for this particular extended family, that has some relevance. Okay, now Chris mentioned Diony's 80th birthday, and when Diony's, no sorry, I'm going to go back, Puhutakawa. This is Puhutakawa from my property, north of Auckland, and it is from the same tree that when Sally Wall's wife when we buried her ashes, I took some pūtakawa from that tree and put it in her grave at Kaikoura, and that's what I'm planning to put this in with this. And I just think that's a nice kind of family connection too, and especially relevant looking back. Yeah, I didn't make it to Diony's 80th birthday. I had just been there myself, but that was, I celebrated my birthday with Diony, and then Oliver and Ulla went from New Zealand to celebrate her 80th birthday. I wrote for that occasion, and I just thought, well, I went back and I looked at it and I thought, well, actually, that's all right. a few of them might have read it or heard it or whatever, but some of you haven't. So I'm afraid you're going to get that again. So I'm 8 years younger. Wal and I are 8 years younger than Diony and Jan. And so I looked up to her because there were two twins. Jan adopted one twin, Diony adopted the other twin, and Oliver was given a Cocker Spaniel.
Very nice dog.
That was Bob.
That was Bob.
So anyway, so we were all paired up, and it was cemented the gel of the family. But as I was 8 years younger than Diony, and of necessity, I looked up to her. You know, she was a hero, really, heroine for me, and I adored her, I admired her. I was usually respectful of her because she was that much older and could read and could do all sorts of things. But sometimes I have to say, I was a bit scared of her. She let you know just what was what. And especially with manners. And I think we all remember having our knuckles wrapped. Bone-handled knife, if we didn't hold the knives and forks the right way. And I'm still very critical of how people, just so whoever I sit next to Diony left home for university when I was about 9, so I didn't know her well. As Chris said, the great majority of her life was in the States rather than here. But she was a bit bossy. Her manners, of course, were impeccable. I had to wear a huge number of her clothes because, well, there were two. Jan was bigger than Diony, so they were put in identical type clothes, maybe different colours, and so I would wear my own version. They'd wear their versions. Then I'd grow into their versions. It was just terrible. She was very sporty too. I simply wasn't. So I always admired that aspect of that, and I did want her approval. I wanted to please her. I'm sure I did. When she came back from university for holidays, she would again start coaching me in the right table manners, and and especially how to speak properly. That was helpful, I think. It was because she always had a very clear accent herself, a kind of international accent. It wasn't a Kiwi one. She spoke differently from other people somehow. She taught me how to make French toast. She explained to me what periods were. You know, you need to know these things, and you need to have a wise older sister who can help you. She taught me how to drive. She taught me how to improve my sewing. And she taught me how to manage numerous boyfriends. She was fairly popular. And anyway, all of these were skills that I was keen to learn, and that was fine. So our relationship was a long distance relationship, and I've missed her since she's died actually, because my own health hasn't been very good, And it would have been nice to have someone, you know, an older sister to talk to about it. But that's just how that is. So when I eventually got to know her, it was about 1971 in Geneseo. And again, I was still half expecting her to, I was nervous of her because I expected the table manners might have deteriorated.
Now I know why she was so easy on us.
Yeah,
She practiced on all of you.
yeah, she did. Yeah, that's right. Oliver Wall and I, yeah, she did. Yeah.
Understanding.
But she was good in every way to us, and a good example, obviously. But she, what she's done, as Helen has said and Richard has said, and so on. I mean, we are incredibly proud of her. That kind of CV, that list of publications and so on, just phenomenal. But we weren't so aware of that, really. Yes, it was going on, and yes, we knew at the time, but it's when you add up the scale of what she did. And you know, she was small, but she was feisty. And again, she was obviously very intelligent, but she was not academic. And that's what confounded, I think, these other people who did have the PhDs and everything else. Yeah. And just finally, though, and she was so lucky. Most of all the things I envied was her name. You know, that she was called Diony. And she's probably the only person who's ever been called Diony. And you know, I was named after both grandmothers. Very prosaic names. One of which I won't even acknowledge now. I was so glad when Ethelwyn was born. But Diony Huia was wonderful. It was exotic. It was imaginative, and she lived up to all of those kinds of things. She was so distinctive, and maybe it was a challenge. Maybe because she had such a name, she needed to be as good as she was, to live up to it and be worthy of that neat name. And I'm really glad that she's took it on board, the Huia aspect of things, and even today, and as you'll see on her gravestone, you will the image, the graphic is there of a Huia, which is again a very elegant, rather flamboyant bird.
Yeah.
She was very well named. So, and she lived a long time. None of us lived as long as Nancy. I don't think any of it we will, actually. But probably just as well. 93? Yeah. 93, I don't think so. No. Anyway, not to worry. So that's all I want to say. I mean, she was a special sister. I didn't know her well enough. I so enjoyed getting to know her when I was about, must have been about 24. And it was great, and later on we're going to hear some music, and I'll probably get up and dance with Diony when that song. And the song that we're going to sing now, the Waiata, is Farewell to Thee, and on Nancy's gravestone up there just is that phrase, Farewell to Thee. So some of you may know it, some of you may not, but it's an old one.
Well, I'll kick us off, and Julia's right. No, I didn't need that. Julia's right. It's a song that Nancy taught us. She played the piano, she sang it, she loved the song. It is a love song. It's a song about Diony and Richard, really, and it's about the sadness of parting. Okay? It is bloody sad, aren't it? Proudly sweeps the rainbow cliff, borne swiftly by the distant gale, while the sound of love's parting grief sadly echoes amid the flowering vale. Farewell.
to thee, farewell to thee. The winds will carry back my sad refrain. One fond embrace before we say goodbye, until we meet again. Sweet the thoughts I bear away with me, dear memories of the happy past. And though now we whisper farewell, yet I know we shall meet again at last. Farewell to thee, farewell to thee. The winds will carry back my sad refrain. One fond embrace before we say goodbye, until we meet again.
The Hawaiian version.
Aloha, aloha, the winds will carry back the sad refrain. One fond embrace before we say goodbye, until we meet again.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's working. Wallace.
Well, as I stand here and look at you all from around the globe, people that have travelled so far, and there behind you I see the bay. It couldn't be more appropriate. Yes, Nancy, after my father Ivan just watched me closely at the feast. No, I have immaculate toenails. And some of the first memories I've got of Diony and Jan were at 33 Ashgrove Terrace, which was a fantastic homestead to grow up in. And I mean, we had the Heathcote River, we had bush, and we had an orchard, and we had a poultry farm.
And goldfish.
And what?
Goldfish.
And goldfish and frogs. I could go on, but what I remember distinctly in the living room at 33 Ashgrove Terrace, where we had the fireplace, we had a wind-up gramophone. And I think it was His Master's Voice was the make. And there we had our 78 records and it stashed beside the gramophone. And of course there was Elvis Presley. And I remember Jan and Diony dancing around the dining room. So this was more dancing, even after ABBA. Well before ABBA, of course. Well before ABBA. All shook up, Elvis Presley. And Diony and Jan had flared skirts and wide belts and shocking pink socks. And both had crimson lipstick. And they jived around the room. For me, it was the beginning of being a bodgy. And Jan and Diony, I think you probably could call them widgies. I'll have to explain this to the American cousins later on. But as I look around the room here, I can see a few bodgies and widgies. Yeah, there was one incident I remember quite well, and I'm not going to speak for long, but Diony also studied anthropology. Well, you probably, people have touched on that. And she was in Christchurch, and she went out on an archaeological dig at South Brighton, out beyond Brighton in Christchurch there. And it was a guy called Roger Duff was in charge. I think he was director of the Canterbury Museum at this point.
Yeah.
And Diony said to me, "Oh, Wallace, would you like to, join us? I'll be out there anyway, you make up your mind." So, and I was only about 12, and I thought, "Oh, this sounds really interesting." So I cycled right across Christchurch, as you did in those days, cycling into a northerly. And I joined the students and Diony and Roger Duff in the sand dunes there, and they had all white string laid out in squares, and they were digging carefully. And I thought, "Oh God, this is bloody boring." What do they hope to find? So I just wandered off through the sand dunes, and I was kind of kicking casually along, and I saw a piece of greenstone. And I knew that this was significant. It didn't have any particular shape, but it was definitely a piece of greenstone. And so I took this back, and they were all crouching over their white string and digging and digging. And I think somebody found a teaspoon. But apparently it was a Victorian teaspoon, so it was relevant to the dig. And I sort of thought, "Oh, I better show Diony what I found." And I went up to Diony and she said, "Oh, well, we'll take it to Roger Duff and see what he thinks." And I took it to Roger Duff, and he was staggered. I mean, they'd been finding very little, and suddenly a bloody 12-year-old boy and a younger brother of one of his star students comes up with a piece of greenstone. Well, I didn't have it in my hands for long. He whipped it away, and I never saw it again. And and getting back to Diony's name, Diony Huia Young. I mean, she was glamorous, and she was sophisticated, and with a name like that, she naturally enough gathered everything she could to do with the huia. We went across the Wairau Plains, driving, must have been driving from Picton driving from Havelock through to Picton. There was the Huia Vineyard on the northern side of that long straight road. And so we went in there, and she collected baseball caps, t-shirts, mugs, anything that had the Huia emblem. Excuse me. But she was generous. She really was generous. She bought my jewellery, she bought my small bronzes, she bought my watercolours, and she had a really good eye. And she always, herself looked really stylish wearing jewellery, and she collected Native American rugs and artwork from the Navajo and the Zuni Indians near the Grand Canyon. So yes, I miss her. One of the last times I saw her was when she and Richard were here some years ago, and we drove west. We thought we'd have a picnic, and I thought, well, what better place than the Rewaka Resurgence, right over past Rewaka, obviously, where the Takaka River comes out from under that great marble mountain. It was a great day, and there were a lot of people there, and we wanted a picnic table, and we found a really good one in the bush, and I think it was Richard said, I'll sit here and guard this table so no one else gets this place. And we went back and got the picnic basket, and we had avocado and chicken, and we had a really terrific picnic. And I just want to finish off, when I think of places like the Rewalker Resurgence and really beautiful landscape, for Julia and me and John Webber and others of the family probably, Paparahia, north of New Plymouth, was the most fantastic place. And this is where Jack and Sybil, Jack Webber, Nancy's younger brother, had this great sheep station. So great to see you here, Glenn and Neil. And I think this is, just one last little anecdote was Diony, I'm not sure who she was driving with at Paparahia. They were going down that lovely river towards the Awakino, coming out of Paparahia, just at dusk. And they saw something right across the road. And somebody in the car said, oh, that's just an opossum. But Diony said, no, stop, that wasn't an opossum. And this little animal was trying to scrabble up the bank, but kept slipping down. And they reached, and Diony rushed over and grabbed it, and it was a kiwi. And maybe she should have plucked one of those feathers. Okay. Time for Waiata.
Well, this one's a family favourite, so you won't need song sheets for it. Down in the depths of the sea one day, a jellyfish met a blue cod. The cod smiled at her in a lordly way and gave her a satisfied nod. I'm the best flavoured fish in the whole wide sea, which of course here is not very odd. So wouldn't you be a blue cod, said he, oh wouldn't you be a blue cod? Down through the waves came a fine big bait, the cod made a snap, it was gone. Then up shot the cod, for he'd met his fate, the jellyfish only looked on. Oh, the cod has been pulled from the big safe sea, on a line at the end of a rod. I'm glad that I'm not a blue cod, said she. I'm glad that I'm not a blue cod. Looks like the microphone's not working, so I'll... Oh, yes. Okay, then I'll use it. I'm going to be quick. I don't have prepared notes. Many things have been said about Diony, and I really endorse them all. Before I get on to my thoughts about Diony, I just will take the opportunity of thanking one or two people for today's event, because it is an event. By my calculation, it's the biggest family reunion of the Webbers since 2007. And it's a tribute, it says two things. It's a tribute to Diony and how fond you all were of her in various relationships. But it's also the fact that we've all gathered here and wanted to gather here shows that we need another reunion. Because we're getting on a bit. Bill and I had our 80th last year. I won't go through the whole thing. We had that was a good reunion too. It was probably as big as this. But at any rate, I just want to say a few words of thanks to people who've been very helpful over today's event. Particularly Chris Bennett and his sister Belinda for the food that they have been preparing for us. Pete and Connie have done an incredible job looking after the hall and decorating it. Connie, thank you for that. Well, people haven't seen it yet, but I have. And it's, when I look at the War Memorial Hall, it's nice to use it. It used to always be the gathering place for family event after family event, and it's all the more relevant now since Angela Fitchett and Richard Wells put together the stories of the men who went away, for whom the song Blue Smoke is absolutely appropriate. So thanks, and to Bill and Nawai particularly for letting us, as always, share the hospitality of Aonaru. Diony and Jan were our oldest brother and our older sisters, and as Julia said, they did teach us manners. In my case, I can never walk down a footpath with Ulla if I'm not on the outside. I never do it. It's so bloody ingrained from those early days. Secondly, sometimes I fail this one, but Jan and I got me to pull out the chairs for them when they came to the dining table. You had to pull out the chairs. So the last one that has stuck with me, we always had to open the door for them and let them through first. And the thought of women who choose to go through or try and go through ahead of me, it never works. It doesn't work. I can't allow that to happen. So they were twins. They were significant in our lives. As Julia said, they were very significant after Nancy and after Ivan died and Nancy was left with us. And I just want to say 3 or 4 words that to me personified Diony. She was really kind. She was really generous. She was a very loving sister, daughter, mother, as we've heard. And she was a loyal and loving wife to Richard. And the last comment I want to make relates to a couple of visits that Ulla and I made recently to Diony when she was increasingly suffering from her Parkinson's disease, which in the end it killed her. And most recently we were there probably 6 weeks or so before she died, and it made me think, living with Richard and Diony for those weeks that we were visiting just made me realise what an incredible job Richard had done to look after Diony. I mean, the Parkinson's is a hard disease. It lasts, it creeps along and slowly gets worse. It never gets better. It never gets better. It always gets worse. And as that happened, Richard was the most dedicated and loving husband that I think anybody could have wanted, and he cared for Diony absolutely until the last minute. And I want to thank you for that, Richard. She's our sister, but she was your wife. So that'll do for me. Now we're going to sing the song that people always say, well, I can never remember the words to it. Look, this song was, if you've read my little booklet about Tangi Wairua, you know that this song was written about 20 years ago, or 25, 30 years ago, a long time ago. Anyway, Tangi Wairua, and I'm not going to look at the words, so I don't need the bloody words, so we'll sing Tangi Wairua. It's the song that was written for the Weber family. Tangi Wairua, te Katangira te matani oe Akakura tauni tie Katani hoki mai wakatuna tukuna Hoki mai wairua kontole Tio mai te monga ere hapeti Toata whaka makurarangi e Te hiri makakawaro Te tani whaka ki te atia maria of Matariki, it celebrates Warahi, or Granddad Wallace Thomas Webber, who stands in the cemetery at the head of the family tree. So that's my contribution to Diary.
Jude, you're up, and I've got to say, thank goodness you caught Jeff's eye, or he caught your eye, because I didn't actually realise that if that hadn't happened, then you would have gone, and then we wouldn't all be here. So, yeah.
There seem to be a variety of versions about that particular event. And I was going to get to it in my speech, so we'll see. Perhaps I shall mention now. I thought it was Diony who pulled out on me, which is interesting. And my version was, Richard, that Diony had an opportunity to travel with Nancy to friends in California and then on from there. And I thought she pulled the plug first, but we'll see. Anyway, there were four of us. Diony, Jan, Bob McCaw and me. First cousins, all the same age, except that I was 2 months older than the others, which I never let them forget. So when Oliver rang and asked me to speak first of the cousins and said, "You're the oldest, Jude," Elizabeth and Malcolm having passed on, I thought, serves me right. My words have come back to bite me, you know where. Most of what I remember about Diony and our childhood together is back to the days of the huge family gathering here to celebrate Daddy George and Lulla's golden wedding anniversary. 31st of December 1950, if I've got it right.
Yep.
Thanks, Ol. We were 12 years old at that time. And we spent our days swimming, jumping off the wall, fishing, playing around in dinghies in the bay. Sorry, the English not so good. The turning pages isn't so good either. Walking around the lighthouse track and maybe down the skids and on to Rockcott Bay. You remember that?
Yep.
Onto the Low Neck sometimes and coming home via Yellow Point. 4 of us played tennis almost every day. It was Diony, Bob, John and myself. Neither Jan nor Jenny showed much interest or aptitude. Or maybe we just left them out. Diony was a good player. I don't think she played much in Christchurch. Anyway, those skinny brown legs of hers would chase a ball to the fence, time after time. I do have a photo of her at age 12 on this court. I think Oliver might have it somewhere. Show it to anyone who wants to see it later. Some of you will remember the Pixie, Uncle Roy's little launch.
Yes.
With his approval and skippered by John, at the time I think 9.5 years old, we would set out to explore Admiralty Bay, never through the pass of course. We would anchor in a bay, usually Garden Bay or Pratt's Bay, eat our picnic lunch and swim, Jan and Jenny included. My father Wallace converted an old door into an aquaplane. Remember that?
Yep.
We had great fun on that, riding behind the Anaroo at every opportunity. And on one occasion I remember taking turns on our way down, almost to Waikawa, and we went to muster the run. You remember that one, John? Sorry, I'm having trouble with my pages. After this idyllic holiday, I went down to Christchurch and lived with the Sutherlands for my third form year, attending Christchurch Girls High School with Diony and Jan. What a chaotically busy household that was. I remember the racket at 7 a.m. each morning, when 4 of us practiced our different musical instruments at the same time. Diony played her cello in my bedroom, Jan propped her music up on the top bunk to play her violin, Oliver played his flute in Nancy's and Ivan's room, if I remember, and I played the piano in the lounge. After that, it was a quick breakfast and a run along the road to catch a bus. At school, Diony and I held our own comfortably in the middle of the class, but Jan aimed for higher things. With Diony and Jan at my side, I adjusted quite well to city life and a large school. Sorry about this. That year was a life-changing year for me. I'm having more and more trouble, aren't I?
Not Mum, you're right.
Yeah, okay. And it was a hugely generous thing for Ivan and Nancy to do when I look back on it. And I know that my parents were so pleased. Relieved, perhaps. I spoke to Bob McCaw the other day. He's not doing so well after a couple of accidents and several spells in hospital. He's pretty much confined to his house now and using a walker to get around. He did ask me to pass on his condolences to Diony's family. He said Diony was special and that he had kept in touch over the years with her through the Christmas letters, as many of us did. He also told me that during the Golden Wedding celebrations, when the adults were making speeches, Diony sat beside him and held his hand. He said it made that 12-year-old boy blush from the tips of his toes to the roots of his hair. Years later, in our early 20s, Diony and I arranged to travel to London together for our OE. We booked on the Fair Sea, one of those spaghetti boats, we called them, those Italian ships. All 6 berth cabins, crammed full of young Australians and New Zealanders ready to spread their wings. Now, my version said that Diony pulled out, but that's I'm not too sure about that. Anyway, she did have an opportunity to travel with Nancy to California and onwards. And a bit later, as Richard has told you, she got a job in Arizona at a museum, or was it Flagstaff, Richard? Mm-hmm. Yes. Right, yeah, here we are. And I stayed on in Hamilton, where I was teaching, and I got engaged to Jeff, who I might say had not been at all thrilled by my plans to travel, to say the least. And as they say, the rest is history. Thank you. I have to get to the last page. I always felt a close connection with Diony, despite very little face-to-face time over many decades. She was good-natured and easy to get along with, full of fun and up for whatever was going on. As a 13-year-old, she was more of an all-rounder than an academic, quite self-possessed and calm and confident. These qualities served her well for the rest of her life. As Bob said, Diony was special.
Jude. We've probably got about 15 minutes before we head over to the grave, so if anybody else would like to say anything, you're most welcome, but if you could keep it brief, that would be great. I have two very, very brief memories to share myself. Diony was hugely generous, and when she came to New Zealand we knew there would be gifts and candy and all sorts of amazing things, and it was very exciting to know that she was coming. She did once bring, the first thing I thought about when I was like, what will I share, was this incredible vision of a bathing suit that she brought for me. Erina, you're probably going to remember this. It was green.
I think there's a photo of us together.
Okay, well, I mean, now I'm wowed by it. At the time, I was just stunned. It was green and pink, and together, stripes. I think it was mostly green, and it had pink and crimson stripes on it. Wow, it was so American. It was like an American gymnastic leotard or something. And I don't know if I was proud of it or not. Like it was a lot. But now I'm thinking, but that was Diony. I mean, as people have pointed out, she was colour, she was glamour, she was sparkles, she was pretty amazing.
She didn't give you the lipstick to match.
No, she didn't. No, but I think you had a lot of lipsticks, and so we probably found one. So did she. I know. The other thing I remember was actually something that Nancy said to me once, and I still don't know if it was true, but she told me that Diony was the only person who could clean up the bone in a leg of lamb better than me. And that's, I don't know. But anyway, but if it was her, that's cool. Anyone else, I probably wouldn't believe it. Anyway. Is anybody else wanting to say a few words?
I will. Okay, well I think he is the first to come, of the family, to come back from overseas to our cemetery. And I would just like to express our thanks, Richard, to you and your family for the huge effort it must have been to make that journey.
Well, she wouldn't have had it any other way.
Well, I know that. It's interesting, but I think sometimes through more other reasons or whatever, some of the wishes of someone who's deceased cannot be honoured, but you have honoured it, and for that we're very grateful.
Oh, thank you.
Jude's talk just triggered a little memory for me. They talked about exploring around Admiralty Bay and so forth, but I remember they were great excitement. They found this little beach just this side of Yellow Point, and they pronounced that its name was J.D. Bay, I think, for Jan, Judith, Diane, but anyway, there was an excursion around there that, you know, they went swimming at J.D. Bay, and Oliver, you know, the butt of this. And we went looking for them, and the Pixie, John was running it. I think Bob McCaw was up the bow. And we were approaching the beach, and Bob yelled out, "There's a rock in the water." And we got a little bit closer, and then he yelled out, "No, it's Oliver's pants." They'd done a skinny dip dive swimming there, and his pants had floated away as the
Oh wow. No crying, no. Is it on? Yeah. Wow. Even though we live so far apart from our American cousins, it never felt far. Diony was great at connecting us all. As we've heard today, she came with wonderful gifts. I'll never forget the ice cream towel that Chloe and I might have shared. And that lasted for God about 20 years. It was really well made, and she was very kind. And back in 2003, no, the summer between 2002 and 2003, I had the opportunity to go to the US to do like a swap USA. I got a visa to go, and the place I wanted to visit was New York City. And Diony connected me to Christine Brennan, I think, who worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I ended up getting an internship there, which was amazing for a kid from New Zealand to work in the America, Oceania and African Art Department. 3 months, kind of unpaid, but what an amazing experience. And so thanks to Diony. I mean, she was great at supporting us, great at connecting us, and really care for all of us. So I just wanted to share that.
Anyone else? No? Oh,
Briefly, maybe just a toe tug of what you said, Petra. Yeah, before the internet, before Amazon, before Temu, for us kids growing up and us cousins growing up in 80s New Zealand, there was Diony. And she, with regular visits back to New Zealand, just always what seemed to us to be the newest in developments in clothes, electronics, toys, food seasoning, Lowry's sold, packet Lowry's, yes, packet salad dressings. And I've still got, I mean, these were highly treasured, coveted items. I've still got toys to this day. Just a couple of weekends ago, I was at Björn's place, and I saw what was probably the pinnacle of all of these items, which was the Armatron, which, for those who don't know, is a robotic arm controlled with joysticks. And I saw that up on the shelf there, and I still got little pangs of envy. And it reminded me, just being here over the last 24 hours, I remembered in 2011, around Easter time, Diony was here, I think with Erina and her family. I don't know if Chris was here, but she had a gift bag for every single kid, not of my generation, but of our kids. And there was heaps of kids here that Easter. And the big room became this morning of, it felt like a Christmas morning, and it was amazing to see, just to get a sense of the excitement and the joy that she brought us as kids, and now seeing our kids in that generation getting a taste of that from Diony. And it just kind of made me think that, for me, what I really kind of take away from her is that she just had this sense of what make children really happy. And it's something that I know came from Nancy and other generations, but she really embodied that for me.
Sorry, getting inspired by everybody speaking. I think that as a child growing up, I was heavily influenced by Diony and Nancy in particular. And I think that my just easing straight into things like naturally giving birth to my children just came, from them being the people that they were and having the influence that they did on me in my life. And I remember being quite inspired and somewhat intimidated by them. But yeah, it was amazing. And I just wanted to share that when I went for my first time overseas, I went and did the camp counsellors thing, and I ended up at one of the camps up in New York State. So, and amongst that, I went and visited Richard and Diony, and she took me through a few of the touristy spots, and then we came home in the evening, and out came the poi. And she was very adept at the poi, so I was like, wow, that's really amazing. So yeah, she just brought a bit of New Zealand to me even when I was overseas staying with her.
Okay, we will now move over to the grave side and bury Diony's ashes.
Kopu o mai pera,